Hey, my name is Mike, and I've been using stories and theaters to teach English since 1995. And I want to tell you why you should be using stories for learning and teaching languages. Now, when you hear a story, you engage with it on multiple levels. Not only are we listening, but we're also projecting, trying to anticipate what is going to happen next, right? And that triggers our imagination, which in turn calls upon memories of our own experiences. When we listen to a story, a series of images are created in our head, which connect to form a coherent series of events. As humans, we are designed to tell and absorb stories of every type and size. It's just part of our DNA. It's something that makes us unique as animals. Other animals can communicate complex ideas. Bees can communicate to give directions to a pool of water, and gorillas can be taught sign language. But humans are the only animals capable of creating a living, breathing story in the heads of others, right? Stories are one of the most powerful learning tools that we have. Secondly, stories are a fantastic way to create what's called CI, Comprehensible Input. CI, put simply, is words, vocabulary. But it also includes a variety of other important communication elements, like intonation, rhythm, and body language, which are all essential for effective communication in a second language. The great thing about stories is that you don't have to understand every single word to enjoy them. In fact, it's better for learning if the listener doesn't know every single word. Then the listener is exposed to a variety of vocabulary, because in that way, they're exposed in a subconscious manner to new vocabulary, and it just starts sounding familiar. And of course, another thing that stories provide is repetition. Repetition is absolutely necessary for us to acquire a new language. It's impossible to hear a word for the first time, understand it completely, and assimilate it into your vocabulary. We need it repeated dozens and dozens of times in order to absorb it completely. And stories provide this repetition in the most natural way, and we as storytellers can enforce it by explaining scenes and situations from different angles. Let me give you an example. Little Red Riding Hood was happily walking through the forest. She was walking and singing happily. She didn't know that there were eyes watching her from the bushes. That's right. In the bushes, the big bad wolf was watching Little Red Riding Hood walk as she happily sang a melody. Well, we've just heard the word bushes twice, happily 3 times, and the verb to be 5 times in different forms. Beautiful, necessary repetition without you even realizing it. So when telling stories, there are several techniques I use to make them have an even greater linguistic impact on my listeners. The first is called circling. This means asking the group as a whole questions about what is happening. Usually these are in the form of yes or no questions. Was Little Red Riding Hood walking to the lake? Was she walking to her grandmother's house? What was she wearing? A blue dress or a red dress? Etc. So the next thing we can use is sound effects. For example, in the forest, what types of animals might you hear? Have the students create those sounds. Can you hear the wind? Is there water running in a stream? And if so, I ask them to make those sounds. It can be once when you're describing the setting, Or these interactive elements can be set up as a call and response element to be repeated throughout the story. And this brings me to my next technique, called call and response. This is when the storyteller establishes a word or phrase to which the listeners will react during the story. It can be a sound effect like wind, the sound of a train, or the bark of a dog. There is a second option for call and response, which instead of a sound effect, you have the audience say a word or phrase. For example, when I say streets of New York City, the listeners have to respond, "I'm walking here." This is great for language learning, and the listeners love it. And I'll tell you a secret. The more emotion and personality the response has, the more the listeners enjoy it. Don't have them say, "I'm walking here." Have them shout, "I'm walking here." The last technique I want to tell you about is called triangling. This is where I ask questions of individuals about what is happening with the story. These questions are slightly more complex, and you can even bounce them from one listener to the other. Here is an example of how that might sound. Angela, what do you think the wolf is going to do? Is he going to attack Red, or is he going to talk to her? And Roberto, what does Hans think of Red? Does he think she is a smart girl? Does he think she's an angry girl? Ask him what he thinks of her. Tell him to give you 2 adjectives to describe Red. So, what happens? Roberto has to ask Hans the question, and then he has to come back and report the answer to me. By doing this triangulation, I am requiring listeners to interact with the language in a simple but useful way. And also, we are repeating. Remember, repeating is essential for language acquisition. So that's it. I hope I have made a good argument for why stories should be part of your classes. If you're interested in seeing how I apply these techniques to my stories, please subscribe to our channel. I'm going to be uploading a lot of stories in the upcoming months. Also, if you have any other suggestions on how to make stories more dynamic and more interactive, please tell us in the comments. All right, thanks a lot for watching and happy storytelling.